Christopher Steele, who was the researcher on the so-called dossier, went to the FBI because he said Trump was vulnerable to blackmail from the Russians. And here is an example, and there couldn't be a better example, of Trump paying hush money, being totally vulnerable to blackmail about something embarrassing.
Apparently, we've reached the point where the President of the United States allegedly engaging in consensual sex outside his marriage is no longer scandalous. A mature development overall, though one wonders how that would play out if the president was a Democrat with the last name Obama. But the latest salacious Trump headline, which, let's face it, nobody wants to think about or talk about on TV, actually could be relevant, particularly a president thought by a former British intelligence agent to be vulnerable to blackmail. And joining me now, Sarah Kendzior, scholar of authoritarian states, former prosecutor Paul Butler, and Malcolm Nance, author of The Plot to Hack America. And Sarah, I'm going to come to you on this because sort of, you know, there's the torrid aspect of the Stormy Daniels story, which is gross and nobody wants to talk about it. And then there is the more substantive aspect, which is that Donald Trump was reportedly, according to this report, willing to pay $130,000 to squash the story, thus maybe making him susceptible to blackmail. What do you make of that?
I mean, of course Trump is susceptible to blackmail. It kind of blows my mind that people are just realizing this now. This is like just realizing that he's a racist. Why do people think that Trump has surrounded himself with a lawyer goon squad for 40 years, whether it's Roy Cohn or Michael Cohen? The company he keeps include the American mafia, the Russian mafia, arms traders, pedophiles, money launderers, and other people involved in, in white-collar crime. When you surround yourself with those sorts of people and engage in those sorts of actions, your lawyers will be very aggressive. They do things like put out an NDA for basically anyone Trump comes in contact with because they know that he's a consistent scumbag. So this is just one more example of a pattern of behavior that has been going on for Trump's entire life. And honestly, the idea of Trump having consensual sex is kind of a novelty, given that he's been accused of sexual assault and rape by over 16 people. And so I think, on the level of scandals, this is kind of low. But as part of a bigger pattern, it's very alarming and it's very predictable.
Yeah, but one quick thing, just to stay with you just for a second, because you have, indeed, as you mentioned, reportedly In Touch actually held back the story of Stormy Daniels' 2011 account because essentially they were threatened with a lawsuit by Donald Trump's attorney. And I'll just give you the statement. Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, who's the attorney in question, he's not returned NBC's request for comment, but he did tell, this is what the Journal said in their report. They said in emails to the Journal this week, Mr. Cohen didn't address the $130,000 payment, but said the alleged sexual encounter that President Trump has once again vehemently denies any such occurrence, as has Ms. Clifford. He also declined to discuss essential consultants and asked the Journal to cease wasting my time. So you have you have this back and forth over whether or not there was a payment, et cetera. But as you said, Donald Trump is known to be promiscuous. He's already been accused by some 19 women of alleged sexual assault. Is he susceptible to blackmail if it's public already that this is the kind of man he is?
And for blackmail for Trump is not a matter of personal shame. It's a matter of survival. There are basically two things he thinks about, and that's keeping his finances and, right now as president, potentially being removed from power and being prosecuted for a crime. He will do anything to keep that possible. In terms of Michael Cohen, Cohen aggressively threatened journalists throughout the presidential campaign. This is not new for him, and we've seen a number of outlets pulling not only the Stormy Daniels stories, but more consequential stories. The Wall Street Journal wouldn't print an op-ed about Trump's mafia ties. The New York Times and other outlets held back on printing information about Trump's ties to the Russian mafia and to the Kremlin, knowing full well that they existed because they'd been told by people from Fusion GPS who had learned that from Christopher Steele. So we have a pattern of intimidation. We should remember that Trump himself is susceptible to blackmail if it does affect his money and his power, but also Trump blackmails. His team blackmails and threatens, and that's been true for 40 years.
Yeah, and Malcolm, to that same point, somebody with Donald Trump's background and proclivities, his tendency to lie, his tendency to cheat on his wives, his tendency to have these sexual liaisons and these charges of sexual misconduct, how could foreign intelligence services use that if, again, he is a public sort of miscreant, if he's not, if this isn't something that would damage his reputation, because it is his reputation?
No, and he was very well known for all of these things. There's a lot of documentation for that. He was Playboy billionaire for a very long time. That being said, when Donald Trump went to the Miss Universe pageant in 2013, that's when he became a nationally tasked target for foreign intelligence agencies. That's when they saw him on a much larger stage. They loved him in Russia. You know, The Apprentice was a top-rated show in Russia. And when he got there, he came there with an unsecured telephone and a completely open life. And that meant that whatever they saw there, whatever they could have used while he was there, they would start tasking, like I said, they would start collecting on that, and then they would continue that collection until he started running for president. And then all of that information they would have gotten on him was gold. Now, all of the stuff that had been done in the past, they would have scrubbed that against what they know. So if he had an affair or he did something while he was in Moscow, they would go back and they would cross-check that against all the past accusations, and that would allow them to be able to directly blackmail him by showing not just his foibles, but a history of foibles now scrubbed by a hostile intelligence agency. It's a nightmare. I mean, any president that has this, we're going to need legislation so that presidents have to be immediately kicked out of office if they're blackmailable in the future, if any of this comes to pass under Donald Trump.
And, you know, Paul Butler, to the point I think that Sarah made that is a smart point as well, you know, for Donald Trump, it's more about his money than his sexual life. That's what he actually cares about. And I want to play you, a Wall Street Journal reporter named Michael Rothfeld was on Rachel Maddow on Thursday talking about the aspect of this alleged payment that could actually be relevant from a legal standpoint. Take a listen.
There are some lawyers who have speculated that if you made an undisclosed contribution in kind to influence an election, it could be a violation of campaign finance law. John Edwards was prosecuted on a theory like that. He wasn't convicted, but you know, you never know what kind of case prosecutors might make. I don't know.
Paul Butler, could Donald Trump be vulnerable if someone gave a contribution to pay that $130,000 to pay off Stormy Daniels?
I think that Trump absolutely has exposure here. We need to know more about this deal that went down that was structured by Michael Cohen, who calls himself Mr. Fix-It. So, you know, there are a lot of salacious details about spankings and sharks, but at the end of the day, this story is about the integrity of the President of the United States and the extraordinary measures he takes to prevent the truth from coming out about him. When rich guys want to create a slush fund to pay off people, they go to Delaware, which has very protective laws about forming these corporations. Bannon said in the famous book, he said there are 100 women and Trump paid them all off. So, Joy, once again, follow the money. Where did this money come from? What do we know about it? What did Trump know about it? Again, extraordinary length to prevent the truth from coming out.
Indeed. I don't think we've ever had the phrase spankings and sharks on the show. We've had a lot of interesting things on the show. Sarah Kendzior, Paul Butler, Malcolm Nance, thank you all. And coming up at the top of the hour, the Senate reconvenes at noon for a rare working Saturday to try and resolve the government shutdown. But up next, our moral moment with Bishop William Barber.